It's the 4th of May. You know what that means. National Orange Juice Day! Yeah, okay, fine, we'll do the Star Wars thing. Will a pod racer make you people happy? After blocking out the basic shape of the pod racer, I create a turbine fan thing. With an array modifier, I can have a bunch of blades generated in a circle, then spin them for a fan-like movement. I cut out a bunch of faces from a sphere and hide the top half. The bottom half gets stretched out and shrunk into a spike shape. With the top half back, I can extrude tubes from the open faces on the bottom upwards. And with a little editing, I will join the edge loops from the tubes to the open faces on the top half. Then they get tucked in to provide a better aesthetic. Adding a loop cut under the mushroom cap and lifting it helps add definition between the two parts, which, in turn, inspires me to add definition to the tubules. Using a curve and the same array modifier as last time, I can create a new set of propellers for the aerospike. I've liked the idea of aerospikes ever since I first learned about them. I know this isn't remotely how aerospikes work, but pod racers are essentially a set of jet turbines roped to a sled. Realism isn't my first concern. I can make a generic vent by beveling the corners of a cube with the front and back faces removed. The blades are a simple set of 3 planes set at an angle. Later on I can duplicate and alter this as needed, though I won't. In my time spent in boiler/machine rooms, I've seen this round thing with blades. I don't know what it is, but I suspect it's some kind of radiator. And it looks cool, so I decided to make one. I bevel the edges of a cylinder and extrude them outwards to make the blades. And after fiddling with the slope, I'll create an inlaid dome for the top. Extruding the faces between the blades adds a little more to the radiator vent feel. One thing I decided I totally, definitely, 100% am going to need is a spring. Now, I'm sure there's an easy way to do this, and it would have taken me 10 minutes to look up a tutorial and follow it. But spark that, I'll do it my own way. I started with an octagon, removed an edge, added an array, decided that was stupid, duplicated it, rotated it, joined the two, then used proportional scaling to unflatten it, duplicate it, join them together, and give it shape. All of which would have made more sense had I bothered to line up my script with my video. At this point, I've been trying to think of something unique I could do with my pod racer. And when trying to go back to basics and relate the pod racers to something IRL, I realized that the closest analog isn't NASCAR or Formula 1, it's powder puffers. A driver, roped to a set of engines that are external to their seat, is basically sled dog racing. And nothing else. Thus, I am inspired to add more engines in a line, separating them to be visually distinct when viewed from the front. I redid the blocking with more details and added the tractor beam thingies between the engines. The sled doggo revelation also gave me an idea for my driving section, which is good because I was having trouble coming up with the pod itself in the first place. It starts off rather basic with a pair of fins on either side. I remembered to use the lattice this time so I can deform it into a sleeker shape without making a commitment to that shape. When I'm modeling, I tend to jump around a lot, so we'll come back to this later. I also know I want a fin flap thing for steering. That starts with a leaf shape that gets bent down the middle and deformed with another lattice. You'll notice I switch to a different setup occasionally. While not as big a viewport as the standard setup, I find that being able to see objects from multiple angles at once gives me a better idea of what changes I'm making and what those changes are actually doing. It might be harder for all of you to follow, but it's my project, so struck you. Here, for about 5 seconds, I know I just need a receiver for the power couplers. Around the time I started this project, I was working on a mech model, and I'm sort of just running with the design element of boxy with flattened corners. Then I want to have an intake grill on the front because why not? Incorporating a cylinder into the middle of this makes it look less flat. Or that was my reasoning until I remembered where I had seen this design before. I still want the cylinder though. Maybe later I'll replace it with a jet turbine or something. The vent slats take a few attempts and some finagling to get the right orientation. Once I have them arranged the way I want, I can create a cutout of the cavity that they'll sit inside, and use a Boolean modifier to remove anything that sits outside of that cavity. Going back to the fan thing, I'll extend out the back end for no good reason. Blender has this snap function that allows you to move objects and have them cling to the surface of other objects. Using this, I can place the vents and the power pump onto the sides of the spinning blade device. I also want a little thruster thing. Can you tell I'm just throwing in random ideas at this point? By cutting a cylinder into a quarter and then mirroring it across the X and the Y axis, I can make it so I only have to work on one section and have it repeated all the way around. The extra flaps don't really do anything, but the thruster would look dull without them. I don't know. With those in place, I can create a basic piece that can be repeated with an array into a mechanical-looking thing. An array modifier will copy it as many times as I want, and the curve modifier will bend the result around in a circle. A few tweaks of the size of the starting shape, and I have something that's not unlike a cable protector that I've totally seen somewhere before. Duplicating the setup, I can create several layers of coil rings that only need a little bit of adjustment. I think these coils would look cool in front of the aerospike, but they need something to hold them in place. So I'll add this support bracket, fitting it to the coils and duplicating it several times to give the right impression. I have a plan for something to attach to these coils, but first I need a place for them to attach. By putting the center of rotation at the center of the coil, I can extrude out a plane that will have the same curvature as the coils. It needs a few pointless bevels and extrusions, as does everything. With that in place, I can add the flaps that I made earlier, and the curve of the flap goes right around the aerospike, almost like I planned it. There are a number of placement and shaping tweaks, but those aren't interesting. And then lastly, I'll add a cap to the front. I need to connect the different sections together. In the movie, we see these cables connecting the pods to the engines. Anakin even goes all loopy when one of them breaks. But beyond connecting the two things, we can only really speculate what they do. I suspect that they're a combination of high-tension cable and circuit wiring that pass commands between the engines and the pod. Then again, why wouldn't the command system be wireless? Therefore, my connectors will essentially be tow hooks anchored into the various engines. With the snapping feature again, I can put at least one anchor on each engine to tether it to the one in front and the one in back. Before continuing this line of thought, I switch to adding more power coil emitters. Then decide not to. Instead, I'll do the kit bash and bring in parts from another model I made and incorporate it into my design. Eventually, I decided that these look better on the underside of a singular box grill. Bringing in other points, I feel like these tow hitches need better anchor points on the coil rings, and so I attach them to the forward and rear rings. A big old plate gets dropped onto the back of the pod, with a few reangulations to turn it into a control panel. These limb joints, once again from another project, are set into the base of the control panel. A pair of beams get added to these joints at some point, but I couldn't find the footage. So just trust me that they will make the pod look like the skis on the back of a dog sled. Once more into the lightning couplers. I literally just took the vertex lines from my blocking stage and shifted them to fit into the sparking projectors. I'm trying to add angles to them so that they look like electricity, but I can never get it to feel right. I also need to make sure that it works from multiple angles, not just above or in front. Trying to make it look good from both angles is problematic, since it might look subtly jagged from one angle and look entirely boxy from the other. To get the real zappy, flashy effect I'm looking for, I'm using shape keys. Think of one of those pin toys that you put your hand into and it takes the shape of your hand. You can put whatever you want into the pins and it'll take on its shape, but once you remove the object, the pins will all return to their same flat, basic shape. With shape keys, you essentially can save the different shapes, then slide it back and forth between the base shape, aka flat pins, and the new shape, the handprints, and the faces, and the pins. Shape keys even allow you to shift into multiple alternate shapes at the same time, like combining your face with your hand. By adding shape keys to the basic shape of the lightning, I can animate switching between the 3 lightning strikes at random to create a moving lightning effect. And I decided to add a second lightning arc to each coil for some added visual chaos. Was there a better way to do this? You ask a lot of questions, don't you? And we're back to the tow cables, like I'm going backwards and remembering what I was doing one at a time. A torus is enlarged on one side and stretched from the center. I'm kinda going for a carabiner type of thing. That gets an anchor to connect to a cord, and the carabiner is copied onto either end of that bungee cord arrangement. One carabiner goes to one tow hitch, and the other goes to a different tow hitch. The hook modifier can be used to link a part of a mesh to a separate object. With that, I placed the carabiners on the towing anchors and hooked them there. Anywhere the anchors go, the carabiner will follow. This is the first time I've used this modifier, and I found out that it didn't work 100% the way I thought it would. Much fiddling was involved in getting it to work right. And even then, if I move around the anchors more than a few units, the cord in the middle turns into some kind of discarded straw wrapper. I'm trying to overcome this problem by adding a cloth-like behavior to the cord, but I can never get the hang of the cloth settings and the whole thing keeps getting worse and worse. I'll give up on it, as the different parts aren't going to move around that much. I'll put the rest of the cables in place before moving on. I bring in some pieces from long-lost projects, this time in the form of this hubcap-looking thing. A round bit with a handle on it looks kind of like a fuel cap to me, so it goes on the pod. If the engines are out in front, how does the fuel get to them? Is that what the connectors were? A fuel line? Or do the engines store their fuel internally? You never know with Star Wars. Anyway, more random parts end up wherever I think they might look good. These round plates, for instance, can go on the control panel. I think that's where I'll put the control sticks later on. That way, if I put a character on this thing, I won't need to be particular about their hands gripping the controls in a natural way. Don't know what to do with this bit. Whatever. This tube can be an exhaust of some kind, if I can find a good position for them. If you haven't noticed, the basic structure of the build is done. I've entered the detailing stage of the build. I've never been fond or really that great at detailing. I prefer each part or element of a design serve a distinct purpose. In a lot of cases, the details could be anything and are often just randomly there. Or at least that's how I feel when I see Greeble. But I freely admit that the details are what bring a piece to life and make it fit into the world. After all, I don't understand almost anything about the machinery in my boiler room or under my car, but I know they serve a purpose, and I know they also look 2D and random, just like Greeble. So, there you have it. Having this project be a kit bash using old project parts really helps with that, as I can just nick my own stuff and say, where can I put this? The radiator and the spring make a comeback. No, I did not forget about them until now, shut up. In the spirit of adding more Greeble, I think what this pod racer really needs is more random-ass pipes. These go all over the place, connecting nonsense parts to other nonsense parts. Sometimes they even just dip right into the body with no explanation. I have this idea for what to do on the other side. Putting a few of these old tube plugs in place, I can form pipes to connect from this old unit on the side to the 4 spots around the engine. I'm actively choosing not to make the pipes well-formed and straight this time. Instead, I'm thinking of them more as cables that have been stuck into place, but only as needed. Building on the idea of protected cables, I'll pull that basic building piece from the coil rings. Then spend the next few minutes trying to remember how to get the shape, the array, and the curve to play nice with each other and do the thing I know they can do. This is why I usually make the mesh shape and the curve at the same time. Trying to pull them together after the fact requires an argument and several curse words. Eventually, I remember to change the curve's point of origin, clear the shape's location, and parent that shape to the curve, which allows the array to follow the curve without running all over the place. Don't worry if you didn't understand it, I did. Kind of. But I'll forget it again next time. Then it's a matter of editing the shape and the number of clones in the array to fit the new placement on this coil. At this point, I'm pushing my deadline like Qui-Gon pushes his luck.
I'll take that bet.
The last thing I want is a bunch of switches on the control panel so that it doesn't look like a blank nothing. A tall cylinder makes the switch itself, a circle at the bottom makes it go uppy downy, and a rectangular block will blend it into whatever surface I put it on. With a set of arrays, I can line up a bunch of useless decorative switches at once. I make a pair of handles for the underside of those plates I totally remembered to record adding to the model, and another set will go inside these round things to act as control sticks. Now, let's see how it turned out.